Welcome to my EDUC 822 supplemental reading presentation. My name is Emily Edmonds Eveland, and I read the article Student Attitudes Towards Biliteracy in a Dual Immersion Program by Linda Jarena. So the research question was, how do elementary students perceive biliteracy in a dual immersion setting? Biliteracy is reading, writing, and speaking in two languages, in this case Spanish and English, and a dual immersion program is where students can learn those two languages in an equal amount of time. So the first hypothesis was that a certain group, the English literacy, would dominate over the Spanish literacy. And the second hypothesis was that there would be a hidden curriculum inside and outside of the classroom that would negatively impact student attitudes towards a language other than English. So the design was a correlational study. The independent variables were language and grade level, and the dependent variable was student responses. They chose this design because it can suggest a relationship that exists between these variables. Regarding internal validity, the survey was designed in both languages, and there was also rephrasing of each question to address Spanish literacy and English literacy. So the student participants. There were two classes, one first grade and one second grade, participating in a dual immersion program within a larger school of 916 students. In the 33 students that participated in first and second grade, 55% of them were Spanish dominant and 45% of them were English dominant. All of the participants were aware that they were in a program that was different from the mainstream classrooms in their school. And also these participants entered the immersion program in kindergarten. The teacher participants were one first grade teacher and one second grade teacher. They were both bilingual. However, the first grade teacher was a native Spanish speaker, and the second grade teacher was a native English speaker. The study did report that the second grade teacher had did not have an intimate relationship with the Spanish-speaking families like the first grade teacher did. So the instrumentation was a 26-item survey using a 4-point Likert scale, and there was a range of 4 smiley to sad faces to indicate student attitude. A 4 would be very happy, a 3 happy, a 2 not sure, and a 1 unhappy. This was made and used based on a previously validated reading attitude survey and a previously validated attitude survey of a dual immersion program. It's important to keep in mind that this was used at the end of the school year, and it was also given in the child's dominant language. Here is a picture of the survey. You can see on the left-hand side, the survey is given in Spanish, and the survey on the right is in English. It's hard to see here, but the Spanish questions are actually asked first. How important is reading in Spanish to you? And then, how important is reading in English to you? And the survey continues in this way, where Spanish is before English, again going back to the hypothesis so that there wouldn't be a hidden curriculum where English is before Spanish. Regarding validity and reliability, the survey is valid because the content of the survey was reviewed and revised by experts in the field of bilingual education, and it's also valid because native Spanish speakers reviewed the Spanish translation. Regarding reliability, I received a 0.85 overall alpha, which is a measure of internal consistency. That is how closely related a set of items are as a group. So let's look at those sets of items as a group. The responses were analyzed based on their dominant language and grade level into 8 separate sections or groups. And these 8 separate sections operationalized what the researchers defined as student attitude towards biliteracy. So the first 2 sections deal with personal value of each language. The second 2 sections are perceived competency in each language. The next 2 sections are about social value of each language. The 7th section is about personal value of biliteracy, and the last section is about social value of biliteracy. And you can see the corresponding questions that relate to these sections on the right-hand side. So they had specific findings that are notable in 3 different sections. The first one was social value of Spanish by grade level. And they found that as students increased in grade, the second grade sample, and have a longer time period exposed to the language, the more the social value of Spanish diminished. The second finding was that was around the social value of Spanish by language. And this was most concerning because the native Spanish speakers felt that their language had the least social value. And the last section, personal value of English by language, was a more obvious finding, that native English speakers had a high personal value of English. So how does this relate to my practice? And I had to keep in mind the research question was, how do elementary students perceive biliteracy in a dual immersion setting? Well, I teach in a dual immersion school, and when I look at the school described in this article, it's very similar in the percentage of students receiving free and reduced lunch and the amount of English language learners. I actually administered the 26-item instrument to more students in first grade, second grade, and third grade chose not to participate, and fourth grade. So the difference is that my school is a dual immersion school, and the article looks at a dual immersion program within a school. And also at my school, not all the teachers are bilingual. Actually, none of the English teachers are. They work with a Spanish partner. In the article we looked at, all of the teachers were bilingual. So I gave the 26-item survey to first, second, and fourth grade, and I looked at 2 specific sections, social value of Spanish by grade level and the social value of English by grade level. And you can see the questions that I analyzed were, how do you feel when someone reads aloud to you in Spanish? How do you feel about learning from books in Spanish? How important is reading in Spanish? And how important is writing in Spanish to being a good student? The same questions were asked, but in English. So my findings. On the right-hand side in the key, you can see grades 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 4. And on the bottom, you can see the social value of English and Spanish by grade level. And on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage. So I calculated the mean of very happy and happy, the 4 or the 3 on the Likert scale, and I found the mean and turned that into a percentage. So basically what we found was that what I found at my school was actually a little bit different from the article, that as students increase in grade, so So you can see that right here. As students increase in grade and have a longer time period exposed to the language, the more the social value of Spanish is increased, which is actually opposite from the article's findings. So you can see it goes from 75% to 82% to 90%. Another finding when I gave the survey was that regardless of the exposure in the immersion program, English is always more valued over Spanish. And then as students increase in grade from first to second to third in the immersion program, the value between both languages becomes more equal. So you can see the first graders, the discrepancy between the value in English and Spanish, the gap is quite large, going from 95% to 75%. In second grade, 89% to 82%. And then in fourth grade, 93% to 90%. So as students increase in grade, that gap between the languages decreases. And those were the findings that we just reviewed. So as the director of instruction, some lessons learned was to keep in mind the type of effect that an immersion program or school can have on student attitudes towards reading, literacy in two languages, and also just an awareness and recognizing that there could be a hidden curriculum portrayed by the instructional team, either consciously or unconsciously. Relationship to course. What is impacting how elementary students perceive biliteracy in a dual immersion program? Looking at the process of reading, Snow and colleagues emphasized the role that oral language, vocabulary, writing, and fluency play in reading. So thinking of that in the immersion setting, students are exposed to those processes of learning to read, but in both English and Spanish, which could be positively impacting their perception of biliteracy. Vernon Fegans and colleagues acknowledged that oral language skills begin early and that there are limited studies on the environment of Hispanic families, and within them limited book reading takes place, and this could be due to the schooling of the parents or understanding of school in general. So I'm thinking in the immersion program, the environmental factors change. Students are working with staff who are literate in both languages, and we also have a large amount of books in Spanish in school and sent home with students. So, and even now at my particular school, we can intervene at an early age, opening an early childhood development center. So the environment could be impacting their value of the languages, especially Spanish. And last, vocabulary. Proctor and colleagues mentioned the linguistic interdependence. Achieving significant levels of their first language literacy facilitates development of second language literacy, and also the increase in vocabulary instruction in their first language benefits students' fluency in reading comprehension in their second language. Again, in the immersion setting, instruction in their first language could be positively impacting their language reading and motivation in the second language. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and happy holidays.